Hello, welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. China's economy has slowed dramatically for the first time since the outbreak of COVID-19, with experts now predicting that the country will miss its annual growth target of 5.5%. The world's manufacturing engine has posted its lowest growth in 30 years as a result of Premier Xi Jinping's zero COVID policy. Under the policy, Beijing has enacted snap lockdowns and restrictions on people's mobility. As of July 15th, there were still 31 cities under full or partial lockdowns, including regions which account for 17.5% of the country's economic activity. Retail sales grew 2.7%, while industrial output grew 3.8% compared to last year's figures. This is down from the previous month and far short of analysts' forecasts. Steadily rising youth unemployment is another problem for the Chinese economy, with new graduates flooding an already saturated job market, according to China's National Bureau of Statistics. This comes despite a marginal improvement in nationwide unemployment rates. Remember, these lackluster results come after the world's second biggest economy barely avoided contraction in the second quarter. In an effort to avoid a slowdown, the country's central bank slashed interest rates following this data. However, experts believe that a devastating heat wave and power outages could weigh heavily on China's economy going forward. So how will this impact the global supply chain, and how much can the government really deal with at this juncture? Joining me now to take this forward is Andrew Leong, chairman at Andrew Leong International Consultants, Anant Krishnan, China correspondent for The Hindu. Also joining us, Sean Rain, managing director at China Market Research Group. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Sean, how alarming are the July numbers? According to you, how serious is this for the Chinese economy?
Well, it's very nice to be here. I think there are some serious warning signs that investors need to look at, because it's easily fixed, but I don't think the government wants to easily fix it. So one part, you have the heat wave. It has been incredibly hot in Shanghai the last few months, 41 degrees. I'm burning up. I wore a suit just for you, but I'm really hot right now, even with the air conditioning. So a lot of people don't want to go outside shopping. The biggest problem, though, are the COVID policies. The COVID policies are spreading fear and a lot of lack of confidence in the Chinese consumer population and in business. So for instance, as you know, I was locked down here in my home in Shanghai for 11 weeks. After liberation, 40% of my employees in Shanghai were locked down a second time for 7 days because they were close contacts of close contacts. So what that means is a lot of consumers in China are worried. They don't want to go into a shopping mall because they're scared they're going to get locked down there. And what happens if their kids are locked down somewhere else? It's also stopping people from traveling to do business. Actually, after the Shanghai lockdown, I went on a trip for 7 weeks. I traveled around Xinjiang, I traveled around Hunan, and almost every day I had to get a COVID test, which took, between 1 and 2 hours out of my day, which was a lack of productivity. So until you start to see an easing of the COVID policies, which I don't think is going to happen anytime soon, the economy is going to be in for a rough time. There's definitely demand. People want to get back to normal. People want to do business. But at the end of the day, as long as the government runs a dynamic zero COVID policy, which I'm not saying is wrong, but as long as they run this, the economy is going to continue to be hit. And I'm closer to Nomura's GDP growth estimates for the year.
Right. Important points there. Let me also take them to Anant Krishnan. Anant, all ratings agencies which have slashed their growth forecast for the Chinese economy and have sounded alarm bells are blaming the zero COVID strategy. Considering the views coming in from across the world from rating agencies, do you see a likely review of this COVID strategy in government circles?
I completely agree with what Sean just said, and the view echoes with what I'm hearing from businesses in Beijing as well. And Parikshit, in the 14 years that I've been here, the sentiment that I hear is the most depressed that I've ever heard, even worse than right after the financial crisis. And to your question, I just don't see any steps that would suggest a move away from dynamic zero COVID. Here in Beijing, we're still forced to take tests every 72 hours, without which you don't get access to most places. And you don't see any of the signs that would suggest an exit strategy, such as a focus on a booster vaccination campaign or messaging to the public saying that COVID is not a life-threatening illness anymore for vaccinated. These are the kind of messages you don't hear in China, and people are still afraid of getting COVID. So you don't see any of the signs, Parikshit, that would suggest to move away from zero COVID. And I think until the party congress is over, which is a factor that's looming above everything else, and most likely in October, I think the leadership doesn't want to see thousands of cases, doesn't want to see a wave of deaths that will happen because China has a big elderly population that remains unvaccinated. So you can understand why they are carrying on with it to a certain degree. But I think until there's a concerted effort and an exit strategy, which there is none at the moment, Parikshit, I think it's very clear they're going to continue with this, even though it's inflicting a lot of economic pain.
Right. Andrew Leong, if I can get you in, we have been reading reports about worsening property sales, retail sales, industrial output, investment, all slowing down. What are some of the risks that you see for the next few months for the Chinese economy?
I think adding to the list of woes, of course, is the property sector, which has not yet climbed out of this big hole of indebtedness and default after the Evergrande crisis. And of course, a lot of local governments and local companies either sort of targeted in terms of either liquidation or their applications towards the lenders or investors. I think that this property crisis probably is not out of the woods yet, so that adds to the uncertainty because that affects a great deal of the ordinary people. The emerging middle class, for example, have a lot of their savings invested in them. In addition, I think we've concentrated on a lot of domestic factors, but there are external factors which affect China as the world's largest exporter and also the largest trader, because China is the biggest market in the world. They are likewise hit by these problems, by the pandemics, by the disruption of supply and value chains caused by no less by the Ukraine war, and also resulting in energy shortages, as well as rises in food and agricultural products. So this is affecting a lot of China's external market. So the whole world is in it, but of course China is particularly hit with sticking to this zero COVID strategy. But on the other hand, I think the top leadership has been learning a great deal in the management of this pandemic. For example, Shanghai, after the horror stories which have now been told, I think the leadership is wising up to it a bit, right. Exemplified by President Xi's latest call to maintain stability in the economy as well. In other words, while we're dealing with COVID, let's not forget about the economy. Let's not forget about people's economic livelihood. So I think that there's no silver bullet in the short run. But I think that the pandemic is not going to last forever. So I think that still China is reasonably maintaining reasonable degree of stability.
Okay, Sean, coming back to you, what's the big message emerging out of the China central bank's move to cut key interest rates? And what do you feel will be the impact on the world economy, world supply chains due to this economic slowdown in China?
I think there's two parts. I think Prime Minister Li Keqiang the other day met with the 6 powerhouse provinces in China saying we have to get the economy up and running again. So they're trying to reduce interest rates. They're trying to pump liquidity into the system. But here's the problem. People just don't want to go out and do business right now because they're scared of getting caught with COVID, like I mentioned before. And so the central government has the right policies. The problem is at the implementation stage. So I'll give an example. The central government has said that if you take a COVID test in one province, it needs to be recognized in another province. However, that's not happening on the provincial level. I just flew from Guizhou province. I flew to Xinjiang. In order to do that, I had to get a COVID test in Guiyang. I had to get a COVID test in Xi'an Airport, where I changed planes. I had to get a COVID test in Ulaanbaatar or Urumqi at the airport. and then one at the hotel when I arrived. So I had 4 COVID tests in a one-day period. That obviously is very inefficient. So my concern is that no matter what type of stimulus measures the government throws out into the marketplace, until they're able to get all of the provincial authorities to line up behind one national app for health codes, one testing policy that has provincial, and actually even many cities within a province don't recognize tests, you're going to have a real problem. Now, what does this mean for the global economy? Well, it's still going to be slow, and the supply chains are tough. I just got off the phone with a very senior executive of a $3 billion revenue company, and they said that they're trying to get a shipment of product from China into the United States. Their problem is COVID. So they haven't been able to get an inspector to come into the ship because they have to go through a quarantine process. So the ship is just sitting there. So what they've decided is they're just going to wait. It's not worth their time trying to get an executive in because there's too much quarantine problems. It's too expensive and too difficult to buy a plane ticket. They're just going to wait a month or two, and hopefully the supply chain will ease up and the product is going to be able to go around the world. This means China might continue to export inflation to the rest of the economy globally. It also means that supply chains are continuing to be screwed up, and that could hit the upcoming Christmas season in the United States and retailers there, which is why we're very negative on companies like Walmart, like Target. Those companies are going to nosedive in the next 3 months because they're just not going to have enough product on the shelves. So we're in a very difficult situation. I think the Chinese government at the central government level understands the risks. They're implementing the right policies, but they haven't pushed forward hard enough to get over some of the morass of the local bureaucracies. It's not good for the global economy.
Right. Absolutely not good for the global economy. Anant, on the ground, give us a sense of the kind of stress that you see on the economy, on unemployment in China.
I think that, as the previous speaker said, the sense of uncertainty is obviously terrible for business, where, I mean, when you don't know if there's going to be a lockdown in your district, you don't know. Domestic travel within China, the biggest thing that surprised me coming back here, Parikshit, was how difficult it is to travel internally within China, going from one city to another. And I think it's very difficult for viewers in India to get a sense of how literally going from one city to another, you need COVID tests, need to fill up health codes online. So for business, obviously, this uncertainty is the worst thing that they could have at the moment, which also explains why companies aren't hiring. And I would differ slightly to the previous speaker in the sense that I don't think that the central government policies can be sort of excused for this, only because you hear from local governments that they're given an impossible task, which is they're supposed to keep growth going and they're supposed to keep cases at zero. And the last few months have shown us that it's fatal for any local official if they deviate from zero COVID. So obviously the emphasis is on a very hardline approach to zero COVID, which is terrible for growth. So they're kind of given an impossible choice. And there's no signs, I think, that in this balancing act between the economy and zero COVID, at least until this party Congress, because this is also political, besides the public health considerations. So far, there's no signs of them deviating from this. And I think this sense of uncertainty because of dynamic zero COVID is the biggest obstacle that I see when it comes to businesses and how they're functioning right now in China.
Right. Let me get in Andrew Leong at this point. Andrew, what are the steps that you expect the Chinese government to take right now? What are the steps that are urgently needed, according to you, in order to maybe come up with a stimulus package or give more assurance to global investors?
I think, first of all, the central government has been putting more money in the hands of the local governments and also cajoling them to maintain stability in the economy as well. As pointed out, there seems to be a rather impossible task. But for a lot of the local leaders, with the coming party Congress, a lot of them are looking forward to possible prospects of either promotion or advancement. So they're very, very careful with this kind of COVID situation. And they fear that any kind of risk cannot be tolerated. This adds to the problem. The other thing, of course, it also exacerbates the Chinese youth's kind of frustration. I mean, even before the pandemic, China's the young people are beginning to lose heart. Even though they're earning good money, but then they're regarding it as a hard grind, the so-called 996 syndrome, 9 hours a day, 9 hours from Monday to Friday, 6 days a week. So some increasing number of young people begin to seek a more life-work balance by abandoning the job, maybe a reasonably good job in Shanghai and Beijing, and then retreat to some of the inner provinces to seek inner peace and a higher quality of life and a slower pace of development. So this adds to the whole problem. So in short, we're not anywhere near the end of the tunnel, but I don't think that the tunnel is going to be so long as to collapse the whole Chinese economy.
All right, we have run out of time, but Sean Rain, Anant Krishnan, Andrew Leong, thank you very much for joining us here on Global Eye, giving us your view on the slowdown in the Chinese economy and what it means for global supply chains. We're going to head into a short break, but coming up, a discussion with John E. Herbst on the U.S. senior officials' open letter to Biden administration regarding the war in Ukraine. Stay tuned.